I mean, I've got 30 years experience in doing this, and we've done probably 3,000 investments, over $100 billion of capital we put to work. When I see young people, it's about looking around corners. And unless you're looking around corners to see what could happen, you're not going to be successful. So the people that I want to back today are hardworking entrepreneurs, people that are willing to run either through a wall or around a wall or go over the wall, but get to the other side one way or another.
Forged in America. Forged in America.
I am down here in Miami, and we have a very awesome episode today because when Al and I started doing this, one of the things that we thought was we're just going to bring our friends on. And today we have a very good friend, Ted Koenig, who is joining us. He is the founder and CEO of Monroe Capital. They have over $25 billion in assets under management. They're the largest American provider of private credit to the lower middle market. What that means is businesses that do about $40 million in profit and below. They fund over 100 LBOs every year for PE firms. And Monroe has grown over 20% annually since 2008. And in 2024, Ted sold 75% of Monroe to Wendell for almost $2 billion and continues to grow the firm as CEO. And the next plan for them is to expand into Europe. It is very good to be Ted Koenig. He's got a lot of other great interests we're going to get into today. So thank you very much, Ted Koenig, for joining us.
Great to be here. Nice to see you both.
Thank you for joining us, Slummy, with us here on New Year's Eve. We're all kind of scattered, but it was hard to obviously pin down times. We're excited to just kind of jump in.
So, Ted, I remember finding out at my 50th birthday party that you were the attorney for my father-in-law, like decades ago on some sort of small transaction. So basically, how did you go from being an attorney to founding this sort of giant private credit firm?
Well, first of all, your father-in-law was a very nice guy. He was doing a transaction as an intermediary, and he needed somebody to help him get the deal closed. I was a lawyer doing a lot of M&A work for PE firms and doing a lot of banking work. And most of my banking work got me into GE Capital and to LaSalle Bank, American, Continental, Foothill, Wells Fargo, and I developed a pretty good banking business as a lawyer. I got to be in my late 30s, and I was working my butt off day and night. The problem with lawyers is that the more successful you are, the harder you work. It's an inverse correlation with kind of quality of life. The more hours you build, the more dollars you generate, the more clients you have, and it sucked. I had four young kids at the time. My oldest, I think, was like 7 years old, and I said, I got to make a change. And all the guys that I knew and I really liked were bankers. The guys were playing golf all day. They were drinking at night. They were going out to eat for lunch and dinners. And I said, I can do that job. So I knew a lot about banking. I knew a lot about private equity, and I knew a lot about M&A. So I put them all together, and I thought at the time I would start a non-bank, a non-regulated bank to lend money. And today it's very common. When I started 25 years ago, it wasn't common. There were thousands and thousands of banks in the world. So I thought, based upon my relationships and personal contacts, we could build a nice little lending business doing what the banks couldn't do. My background is CPA, accounting, and law. So I had kind of two strikes against me when I started. I figured that private equity would be too hard to do because you'd have to go operate in something and actually build something. As a lender, you just put money out and you rely on other smarter guys to operate and create value. We just had to put the money out and get the money back.
Well, you were clearly very well educated with your CPA and your law degree ready to go. So I love this idea of going to compete where the people that are making all the money are not necessarily the smartest, most sophisticated, working the hardest. But so you get going, you obviously build this incredible business over a long time horizon. I imagine it wasn't a straight line because in my experience, nothing is ever a straight line. Nothing's ever that simple. maybe you could tell us about some of the ups and downs and some of the challenges that you went through.
Yeah, you're right, Al. It's we started this in 2000. So for those that are old enough to remember in in your audience, there was a dot-com crash in March of 2000. So all hell broke loose. The banks stopped lending money. We got into it. I had some investors. Nobody was sure that we were going to be successful, but that was the best thing that ever happened, because after the dot-com crash, the banks tightened up and they weren't lending money for the next year or so. So we were able to put some money out, built a business. The problem was we were doing mostly mezzanine debt, second lien debt at the time, because the banks were pretty efficient. And the challenge with the business model that we had was we were high interest lending. And what happened is the companies that borrowed from us wanted to pay us off. The good companies paid us off as quickly as they could. So we did a lot of business, but we were paid off within a year and a half of the good companies. The bad companies stayed around for a while. So what I ended up having is a portfolio that we had to keep turning over. So I was like a hamster on a wheel. We were turning over the good companies. The bad companies stayed. And by 2003, by 2003, I said, this business model is not good. We weren't
But by the
making.
way, I spent a lot of my time in the consumer credit space. We actually have a term for that. We call the balance control ratio, which is exactly that problem. Is if your good borrowers all disappear and your bad borrowers control the portfolio,
That's
you're not
exactly
headed
what
to a good
happened.
place.
That's
And
exactly what
Ted,
happened to our business.
we talked a couple episodes ago about the difficulties of just raising capital for a first time fund. So how did you even do that? How much money were you able to cobble together, when you started, and who were the people, and how many meetings were you taking?
So that was the hardest thing I ever did, I think. I was leaving law. I was going to go raise money. I wasn't exactly a private equity firm model citizen to do this business. So I had a lot of good relationships. I went to the banks because at the time, before the financial crisis and before Dodd-Frank, banks could invest in funds. So I went to GE Capital, who I'd done a lot of legal work for. They gave me $10 million, which was like the biggest check I ever saw.
But that's huge for a first time
Yeah, oh
person, first
yeah,
time
yeah,
fund.
yeah, yeah.
I
Huge
went
vote
to
of confidence.
Wells Fargo, gave me another 10 million. And then between LaSalle Bank, Fifth Third Bank, Cole Taylor Bank, and a whole bunch of little banks, I cobbled together another 20. So we had about $40 million of
By the way,
capital.
most of those banks are no longer around,
Yeah, most of them
which
are
is
no
crazy.
longer
Yeah.
around. So we have,
And Ted, for you to even right there is, to me, where probably 95% of first time fund guys would get selected for extinction. You got that 40 million. Do you think it was your track record? Do you think it was your relationships? Do you think it was some form of luck?
it was all personal relationships. There was no reason for anyone to give me money other than the fact they knew that I'd work like hell to deliver them a return and get their money back. Because the worst part was, as I had 40 million. That was it. I went to LaSalle Bank at the time, which was a big bank in Chicago. The chairman, Norm Bobbins, and Larry Richmond were personal friends. I'd done a lot of work with them. I said, all right, guys, I have $40 million as a fund. I'm embarrassed to tell people I have a $40 million fund. You have to give me a $60 million loan against the $40 million of equity so I can tell people I've got a $100 million fund. That was the first
Oh yeah.
time there was ever leverage in Chicago at a Chicago bank on a fund involved in a money raise. So I went out to the marketplace. I told everybody that I had 100 million of capital. Nobody
But
knew it was only 40 of equity and a $60 million line of credit.
Ted, by the way, I think you and I talked about this. I think that's one of the reasons we first kind of got along quickly is that when we started Pangea, our real estate company, we were kind of scrambling. We didn't have any debt. The first debt facility we got was from Norm Bobbins and Larry Richmond at the private bank at that time.
Yeah, they were great guys. They believed in the people side of it. They looked at the business plan. They said, listen, at the end of the day, Ted, are you going to find a way to pay us back no matter what happens? I said, you can count on it. And that was a character loan. In those days, you could make character loans to people. And that's exactly what happened with us.
And I think that with a lot of successful entrepreneurs, when you look back at it, this term fake it till you make it has gotten, a really bad reputation, but there's a good side of it. Like in your case, you said I had 40 million of equity at a $60 million facility. I'm telling people it's a $100 million fund. You're doing that for optic reasons, right? There's no misstatement there. But the point is you had the instinct to know from like a signaling perspective, $100 million at least sounds quasi legit.
Yeah, at the
But
time, people wanted to know that we could write a check. Now, nobody knew that the maximum hold position I could do was $10 million. We were writing 20, 30, 40, $50 million loans at the time, and it was like a delicatessen counter. We were doing the deals on the one side. On the other side of the counter, I had guys in the back room calling Goldman Sachs and calling Fortress and other big hedge funds to sell off pieces of each of our deals. So when we did a deal,
yeah,
we
you
were
gotta
the agent.
balance it.
We were the agent. We were the ones that were facing the borrower. But at the end of the day, the money was coming from all different investors that we had to arrange. And it was like threading a needle because we had to get the closing done and show up with the funding dollars. And we only could put about 10% of our capital in any one deal. So the first couple years, it was like we were juggling balls all over the place. So from a
And
stress standpoint, it was brutal.
when you started Monroe, Ted, how many guys did you take? How many of you were there in the real inner circle?
So what I did is I started the firm. I went out and hired a chief credit officer because I knew that was a discipline that we needed. And I went to a friend of mine at CIT, Mike Egan, who I thought was the best young chief credit guy in Chicago. And I had a huge advantage from my lawyer days. I knew all the bankers. And then I went and hired a guy named Tom Aronson, who was an origination new business guy over at American National Bank, which is now part of Chase. And those two guys were the first guys. And then there was another fellow, Alex Frankie, from a firm called Finova, which was a asset-based lender, and he ran our underwriting. So it was the four of us to start.
How were you able to pay them? Did you have working capital at that point, or were they kind of taking huge pay cuts to come on?
Yeah, well, that's another story. As an entrepreneur, money only can come from one place. And I went out and got a line of credit, a personal line of credit at LaSalle Bank. So again, a guy that had no collateral, no money in the bank. I went out and I signed on a $2 million line of credit from Norm Bobbins and Larry Richmond. And I told them, guys, I need at least 18 months of working capital to get this business going. And I told the guys, I said at the time we got together, I said, guys, if we don't make this in 18 months, not only is our business over, but I'm screwed. So failure is not an option. We have to succeed.
Were you the only one that signed the PG, Ted, of the four?
Yeah. Yeah. The other guys wouldn't have done it. These guys were leaving cushy jobs at the bank, making $100,000 a year at the time. And they had a golf country club. They had their lunches and dinners paid for. I had to entice these guys to come join this fledgling startup that, they believed in me. They knew that at the end of the day, this was a good option. Now, at the end of the day, I had to convince their wives that it was a good option too. One of the guys wouldn't come unless his wife approved it. So I'd have a meeting with her to get her to approve him to come over to start working with me.
So you get going, you get 18 months of runway. Is that enough? What happens from there to the next kind of, milestone phase?
We had to turn a profit by then. I had to make enough management fee. And as a fund manager, the challenge, most funds fail because they're too small and you can't make enough management fees to kind of run your business. So we had 18 months to kind of build up the business. We got up to about $200 million in assets under management within that 18-month period, which if you think about it, at $10 million a crack was pretty good because we had a lot of turnover in the deals as well. So at that point, we were about break even. And that was the key. We built a good track record. I had Citibank, Fortress, and Goldman Sachs as investors now that we could do programmatic, regular investments with. And then I went out and found a big REIT, and they wanted to come in and be partners because as a REIT, you had a 30% bucket to do non-real estate. deals, and my returns were better than their real estate returns. So they used us as their 30% bucket, which allowed us to kind of go from 200 million to about 600 million in AUMs. At the same time, Wachovia Bank, which no longer exists today, but was a big bank in the Southeast and a middle market bank, gave us a $400 million line of credit. And that was kind of the watershed point back in around 2006 that really got us over the hump. Once we got the Wachovia line of credit, I thought we had conquered the world. We were done. I never thought we'd have, $500-600 million of AUMs. And I had to pinch myself. We had about 12 employees at the time, and we had 500-600 million AUMs. And that was 2006. We got into 2007. I thought we were rocking. Everything was going great. I said, I figured this out. And then we got to 2007, the world ended. Lehman collapsed. We went into the financial crisis, and our world just ended. Wachovia pulled the plug on our line of credit. They stopped funding us. Everyone in our industry got upside down because they had mark-to-market credit. They had overnight repo financing. So the banks all mark-to-market and pulled credit facilities. All the fundraising that was done was hedge fund type, where it was all you could redeem in 90 days. So everybody redeemed. We were lucky because I was a chicken shit, lawyer, accountants. We had no mark-to-market credit. We had no asset liability mismatch. So everything was locked up money. So at least we could sleep at night. And the problem was we couldn't put any money out. So 2007, 2008 were probably the best times to invest because you could get whatever you wanted in terms of rates, returns, but there was no capital. I had 600 million of long-term locked up capital at the time. So what we did is we found every way possible to get our money back in deals. We encouraged borrowers to repay. When guys defaulted, we didn't waive defaults. We just were difficult guys to deal with at the time because we had to generate capital. We generated about 250 million of capital during 08 and 09, and we put that money to work back in the market, and we generated kind of mid-20s returns only because the market was so crazy. We were buying good assets at 80 cents on the dollar from other banks and other funds. And then, no, I didn't sleep for 2 years because I was scared to death. And, all my team, I told them, I said, guys, everyone's taking a 50% haircut in compensation. And, we're going to try and hunker down. And we let go about a dozen people at the time. And we got down to a core of about 8. And we just had to fight through the crisis years.
There was so much interesting stuff in there, but I think you said a couple of things that I want to just zoom in on. So one, I think liquidity versus solvency. And I think a lot of times people miss that. Is you might have a business that is solvent, that has more assets than liabilities, but if you're not meeting the day-to-day cash needs of your business, you're not liquid, you're out of business. And it sounds like that was something that you focused on from day one.
Yeah, businesses fail for liquidity. 80% of businesses fail for liquidity, not because they're not, making money or losing money. And I was very focused because I saw that as a lawyer. I knew that. So when we got into the business, I was not going to have any asset liability mismatch where my LPs could pull money out of funds. And I wasn't going to allow banks to have mark-to-market credit where they could rewrite or basically mark my credit overnight and pull my credit facilities. So those were the two things. Even though we paid more for both, we had to pay more for our credit and we had to agree to some more generous terms for LPs. I thought it was important at the time, and we were lucky because everybody else went down around me because of those two things.
Well, it's super smart. And even to this day, that's how banks always go bust. And when Silicon Valley Bank, and we had those bank runs from, I think, 2022, it was the same thing because banks bought a bunch of mortgage bonds that were really long dated. And the value of those bonds went down. They couldn't do anything with those bonds. And they had depositors coming and looking for cash. So they had that same mismatch you were talking about. And there's nothing you could do at that point.
Ted, listening to a lot of these stories, what I'm hearing is a lot of times, something unpredictable happened. you basically say, well, as a lawyer, I knew this. Like I kind of knew which way to go. And that, in a sense, kind of helped you navigate it. Now that you have been in this for decades and you've become, a very big success, I'm sure you've met so many young guys who are now trying to kind of raise capital and they have their story and they want to raise their 200 million or 300 million. One thing that Al and I have been talking about is that as a first time entrepreneur, everyone, says, grind and grind and grind. And of course you have to grind. And our view is that that's kind of table stakes. Like, of course you have to do that. But besides that, you have to get the big decisions right. So when you see these new kids who want to go raise that thing, how do you handicap them? Like, what are your sort of like gut feels about if someone has it or they don't have it?
I was thoughtful in trying to see around corners. And that's what I really look for with people, because nothing, as Al said earlier, nothing goes in a straight line. We had financial crises, we had recessions, we had inflation, we had high interest rates, we had low interest rates, we had COVID. But when I see young people, and I love that today, I mean, I've got 30 years experience in doing this, and we've done probably 3,000 investments, over almost $100 billion of capital we put to work. And when I see young people, it's about looking around corners. I tell people, don't look at business as two-dimensional, because it's not, it's three-dimensional. And unless you're looking around corners to see what could happen, you're not going to be successful. So the people that I want to back today are hardworking entrepreneurs, people that remind me of kind of how I started out, that are willing to run either through a wall or around a wall or go over the wall, but get to the other side one way or another. And the ones that have the ability to see around corners and look at what could happen to them and then plan for those eventualities before they occur. Because once they occur, it's almost too late, because you can get subsumed with the marketplace, because things happen so fast today. And so those are the things I look for.
So what do you think is the state of the American dream? And we love this country. I'm an immigrant. Ravin is first generation. Still very much believe that the opportunity is here, but you've been at it for a long time. Like you said, you're investing and betting on young people. Is the opportunity here? Is it limited?
I will tell you, it's gotten tougher, I think. And, I'm a first generation. My father immigrated from Poland. He was liberated from Dachau in the World War II in the concentration camps. His family was destroyed. His mother and 3 sisters were killed by the Nazis. I was the first one to go to college. And, the challenge is, and I'm really a big believer in this, is education is the great equalizer. And how we achieve success in life is through education. It's not fair if people don't have at least the opportunity to get an education. So we were all lucky enough, Al or Ravin or me, we were able to get an education. Many kids don't go to college. And, one of the things I'm passionate about is inner city kids that don't have a chance, to give them a chance to go to school. There's a lot of crime in the cities. Crime in big cities today has gotten worse, I believe. And the challenge is because there's a bigger disparity from an income disparity. And, a lot of these people don't have any other choice. There's no jobs, and the only way to get out of poverty, which is a multi-generational issue, is through education. So I've been a big believer of that.
Well, this is a good time to probably mention that Ted co-founded with another one of our good friends, Pete Caden, Hope Chicago, which has paid for thousands of lower income Chicago seniors to go to college. And not only that, to bring a parent with them to go to college. When I saw what you guys were doing, I immediately put 100K into your, money raised, because I just thought it was so amazing. So what else would you tell us about Hope and why you did it? And
I got together with a buddy of mine, Pete Cadens, as Ravin mentioned. So what we did is we partnered up. I went to the Chicago business community. Pete and I wrote a decent sized check each of ourselves. And then I got the business community behind it. And what we did is we built a staff and infrastructure. We hired a woman that was the head of Chicago Public Schools, Janice Jackson, to be our leader, our initial leader. I raised probably 50, $60 million from the Chicago business community and ourselves. And we gave away 4,000 college scholarships to inner city Chicago high school kids that would not have gone to college otherwise. So that's the biggest public scholarship program in the U.S. 4,000 kids are going to college. And we're working on a second cohort now to send more to school. But the way we did the scholarships is that one of their parents have the ability to go also. And if the kid doesn't go back, the parents don't go back. So we have a built-in tension that creates a little family pride for both the child and one of their parents, because we found that many of the parents don't have college educations of the kids as well. It's really a two-generation issue. So we thought if we'd solve the two-generation issue, it would allow more kids to go to college. And of the high schools that we've selected to put this program in place, attendance has been up over 35% for kids to finish high school to go to college. So it's really been a great program for the city of Chicago.
How are you measuring efficacy? What are your key metrics that you're looking at?
Well, right now we're about 5 years into it. So the key metrics is number one is high school, or is attendance up and are kids finishing? That was the first thing, because now kids have a reason to finish high school and get a degree. Second, are kids applying to college and are kids going to college? We have applications up 60% for kids to go to college now. And then the third is our kids finishing college. You know, many kids go, but life gets in the way for a lot of these kids, and many of them don't finish. I mean, before we started our program, I think it was 30% of the kids that went to school freshman year actually finished senior year. So that's the big statistic that, you know, we're trying to develop right now, is move that north.
Ted, we're all passionate, Chicago people. Let's think about the state of Chicago for a minute. You and I have talked at length about the leadership in Chicago, which direction is the city going? Is there friction or harmony between, the mayor and the business community? If someone made you mayor of Chicago, or you could have your way, what would you do to kind of bring Chicago back to where it was even the second city again?
You know, that's a great question. We've talked about this a lot over time. Everything starts with leadership. Everything. If you look at companies, look at universities, look at football teams, basketball teams, it all starts from leadership. And if you have an effective leader, a leader can drive performance and can drive change just by sheer will, personality, intelligence. So number one, unfortunately, we've gone through a period of time where we've not had good leadership in Chicago. Ram, I thought, was a good leader, and he knew the importance of making sure the business community was behind the city,
Well, he was
because
a great he was such a great evangelist for the city, I think,
yeah,
more than anything, right?
he traveled all over the world promoting Chicago, and a lot of people in Chicago really didn't understand it at the time. But if you look at how cities work, it's a business. Revenue and expense. And the expense side of it is all the services that are provided, whether it's garbage, cleanup, snow plowing. The revenue side, people don't understand that sales tax, tourists drive revenue. And if your city is not safe, if people don't feel comfortable, if people aren't coming for conventions, hotel taxes, I mean, most of the taxes that are paid in a city are by tourists, by people that come visit. Michigan Avenue has been destroyed under the last two administrations. State Street has been destroyed as shopping districts. We've got crime, hotels, restaurants. It's an issue. And unless we solve that, Ram understood that the business community drove the revenue part of the city. The last two mayors have taken a really almost an anti-business view, more of a socialistic view, and it's alienated the business community, and the business community therefore has not stepped up. I mean, we can't even get the Bears. Think about this. We have a professional football team that contributes all kinds of money to the city, billions of dollars in tourist revenue, and we can't figure out a way to make sure that the Bears stay in the city. We're driving out the people that we shouldn't be driving out of the city from an income standpoint. We want people to spend their money in Chicago. That's how we grow a city.
What I found when Lightfoot was running was people thought, okay, she initially does not have a chance. And then very quickly, she obviously won.
We were deeply invested in the city because we were managing 10,000 apartments throughout the city of Chicago. But a lot of my friends in the business community tried to reach out to her. I think a lot of folks we all know in common, including us, tried to say, "Hey, let us help." And there was a bit of a stiff arm, I think, given to just the business
she was
community overall.
difficult. She was a difficult personality. She was very stubborn. She was, I think, insecure, and she didn't want people to help. She didn't want involvement, and that was her issue. The current guy is different. He just doesn't have the ability to comprehend, what we need to do.
Just an anecdote on Lightfoot. I hosted events for Ram, for Lightfoot, over a couple of years at my house, and I remember, when you do an event and the mayor's coming, you have to kind of go downstairs and greet them. And then I brought her up in the elevator, at my place on Michigan Avenue. And while we were alone in the elevator, I just met her, and she basically said, I only chose to do this event because you're not white. I was like, it was so awkward. I was like amazed. And she had this thing out in the press where she said, I'm not going to be engaging with journalists that weren't of color. And it was, and I have 30 people in my apartment, most of whom are like white people, whatever, just statistically. And I walked in, it was anti-charisma. It was like, the energy was sucked out of the room. But Ted, my question is, when Lightfoot was in, the general view was it can't get any worse. And then Brandon Johnson comes in, and suddenly people realize it can get worse. So, I've lived on Michigan Avenue for 27 years. Okay. Like, I have watched this thing completely go down. Can it get worse? Like, are we at the bottom? And what can people like us do to ensure that this thing starts turning around?
So here's the biggest issue. Less than 30%, I think it was 26% of the population voted in Chicago. So if you take 26% of the people that vote, and there's 4 or 5 candidates, this guy won. Brandon Johnson won the primary, or he got into the election with less than 30% of the 26% of the votes. 6% of the population voted for the guy, which is a scary thing to think about. He had the Chicago Teachers Union, who's, these guys are, it's probably the worst single organization existing today in the country, from a doing the right thing for the constituents and for their own constituents. We have today intractable issues. We have pension plans that are intractable. We have a property tax situation that's intractable. We are going to be forced to raise property taxes, which is going to have the exact opposite effect and push people out of the city that we don't want to push out. So unless we get someone that's more focused on revenue generation, like a Ram, like a leader, someone who's better qualified. This guy Johnson, he was a union picketer. That's basically what his claim to fame was. I'm afraid that because of what's happening nationally with, how partisan the world is, we're seeing a blowback and a pushback in large cities today. And we may see more of it in places like Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, where you've got a more socialist leaning group that's appealing to the populace by saying the city and the government will solve all your problems. We'll have free healthcare. We'll have free busing. We'll have free this, free that. It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Ted, I don't know if you've followed some of the discussion that's going on, and a lot of it on X, because I think there are quite a lot of stories that are not getting national attention because maybe they're not convenient. One of them is this whole debate over the wealth tax, the unrealized gain tax that's gaining steam in California. I don't know if you've seen this, but basically it's a ballot initiative where as long as they get 800,000 signatures, I think it's sponsored by, again, the teachers unions, uh, this will go on the ballot, and then it will be an up and down vote on a 5% tax on all assets of billionaires. It's the first sort of wealth tax in America where the idea is all your assets, all your real estate, all your property, all your stocks, whether you have sold them or not sold them, you owe a tax on. How do you think it plays out?
Well, number one, I think it's probably unconstitutional to tax something that has not been realized. Number two, unfortunately, the Democratic Party has lost their way a little bit. Mainstream America is not going to, it's just not going to sit well with mainstream America. It's more of a socialist movement. The partisanship has gotten so difficult that you can't now, if you're on the right, you can't meet in the middle because the right will shame you. If you're on the left, you can't meet in the middle. The left will shame you. And it's hard for people to compromise because it shows weakness. Until we can deal with that issue, I think everything else is going to kind of fall like dominoes.
I'm curious what both of you think about this. All of us kind of grew up over the last, call it 5 decades with a very, very liberal Supreme Court. And, obviously Roe v. Wade happened in the early 70s. And to me, it was just kind of like gravity. The Supreme Court generally tends to be left of center, and it was like that our entire lives. And it just changed. Okay. So now we have clearly a conservative Supreme Court. And the reason I bring this up is I listened to Ram. I watched him go on the Pod Save America podcast, and he's now blaming the Supreme Court for all of these societal ills. And I was telling my kids last night, guys, this Supreme Court is going to be conservative basically for the next 20 years. There's almost no world in which you're going to get that many vacancies. So is that part of the problem when you have people who are centrists like Ram, who are still willing to boogeyman, SCOTUS and say, hey, this is where it all starts?
Listen, the world likes order. Okay. And whether it's a business, whether it's people basically like order. Disorder is not good. The Supreme Court has basically overruled years and years of precedent in many areas. And that's caused disorder. We've seen massive disruptions in everything from, abortion rights to DEI rights to, university admissions. I don't have an issue whether the Supreme Court is Democratic, Republican, conservative, but there's precedent. And if you don't follow precedent, people are going to find disorder, and disorder is going to create chaos. And that's what we've done, I think.
Well, maybe I'll give you a bit of a contrarian take because, as Ravin knows, I tend to have contrarian views on most things. But I think
Contrarian.
contrarian. So I think my political orientation has generally been libertarian on domestic issues and much more of kind of a strong America that tries to not get entangled on foreign policy issues. I actually think libertarians would basically look at a government as you want to be as small as possible. You want to provide the small number of things that the private sector can't provide, which is safety and security, and try to stay out of the way of the free market and free enterprise. I think we historically have gone away from that for a long time, both on the Republican side and the Democratic side. And the reality is I think the left has gone really, really far. There are those charts of like, I used to be a centrist Democrat, and the left side has gone so far to the left, like you said, socialism. So you find yourself on a center right now. I think the biggest problems facing America are self-inflicted. They've always been, which is too much debt, too much regulatory burden, too much bureaucracy. If I'm a betting person, 100 years from now, America is going to be strong, but we need to self-correct. We have 38 plus trillion of debt. We're running $2 trillion deficits. We have bureaucracy everywhere. It's not sustainable.
I agree with you, Alan. I agree with every one of those points. The challenge is the Supreme Court. We could have dealt with this in a way. This gerrymandering thing, it's crazy. It makes no sense on both sides. Number two, the charitable, the political contributions. these unlimited political contributions and not disclosing where the money comes from, those are terrible, terrible precedents, in my opinion. I mean, the third thing is term limits. We need term limits. Those three things, if you get rid of the gerrymandering, you get rid of the dark political money and the unlimited dollars, and you put term limits in, I think it's a better overall place.
Well, I think you and I can agree on that. I love the Warren Buffett quote about, oh, I could solve the deficit tomorrow. You just make it so that unless the budget's balanced, every member of Congress gets fired. I think we left the business discussion a little bit early in that. I'd love to just kind of go back to, you get through the financial crisis. Obviously, your business continues to scale and grow, and you make the decision to sell 75% of your business. And that was last year, right?
Yeah.
I guess what got you to that point? Why did you decide to sell, and
yes, so
how's it
there's a
going?
lot. So there's a lot of ground to cover between those two things. So we're past the crisis, and what we all learned in the crisis in 08, 09, everything was correlated. The one asset class that performed during that period of time was what I was doing, was this making these non-bank loans that weren't taking out, tying up big capital requirements that the government had to bail out. So what happened was, after the crisis, the insurance companies got into the business. That's what really changed the credit business. Insurance companies started investing, and once the insurance companies invested, pension funds started to invest because they follow what insurance companies do. All of a sudden, in 2012, 2013, this industry of private credit was born, and it just grew 15, 18, 20% a year. More and more people like Monroe formed. We grew our business from 600 million to $1 billion to 2 to 5 to 10 to 20, and we just kept going. The challenge was, over the last several years, is no matter how good of a mousetrap we have, is in order to continue to grow, it requires capital. And we needed more balance sheet capital. A finance company is leveraged. Banks have 30 times leverage. So when a bank wants to grow, they go raise $1 and then they go borrow 30 times that dollar and they grow. In our industry, it doesn't work that way. We raise $1 and we go borrow $1 to grow. So if I'm going to continue to grow our firm at Monroe, I need to have capital. Now, instead of our funds being 100, 200, 300, 400 million, my funds are $3 or $4 billion. I need to have 1 to 2% of that, 30 to 40 to $50 million per fund of seed capital in order to raise LP capital. It got to a point over the last few years, I need $100 million a year in seed capital just to continue to grow our business. So about 2 years ago, I recognized the fact that we were going to need a financial partner to help us with seed capital. And I had basically 3 requirements to do that. Number 1, I needed someone that was compatible culturally. Number 2 was I wanted autonomy. Number 3, I needed capital. I needed $1 billion of seed capital to continue to build the firm and grow the firm. So because of that, I hired an advisor, Goldman Sachs, and we scoured the world for the perfect investor. And we found for us the right partner in a French public company that was basically a very, very large family office that's been around for 300 years. They were like the Rockefellers of France, and they bought 75% of our company. So they're an investor, but they're a passive investor, and nothing's changed, which is kind of a testament to the process and what we've done, is that nothing has changed in our company in the last year or so since we've done our deal.
Ted, since, you guys just crushed it really from the GFC onwards, and then obviously you did this great deal with Wendell. At what point did you feel like you made it?
Ravin, I stay up at night thinking about shit. I still haven't made it. I mean, a lot of my good friends tell me that I'm crazy, that, I should be on a beach somewhere. I worry about, I sweat every detail. I wake up and I think of things and I say, shit, that's something I have to make sure we do. You have to make sure that you're staying ahead of where the game is today. So my head's 3 years from today. I'm not in 2025. I'm in 2028. And number two, it's all about people. You have to make sure you've got the right people in the right seats. And we are constantly looking at people, interviewing, bringing people on, putting them in different seats, because the people that got you at $5 billion are not the right people necessarily at 25 billion in AUMs. That won't be the right people at $50 billion. We're constantly looking to upgrade talent, reward, bring people along. I've got 350 employees today. And, I used to know everything about my first 25, my first 50. I knew the names of all my first 100. At 350, it's impossible.
Let me just tell you something. So when I meet Ted, probably 6 years ago, and we were both in the same professional organization, and we were all kind of. Ted goes, "All right, some guys, you want to go out to a bar after this conference?" I said, "Okay, do I really want to go out with this guy? I don't understand." So we go in the lobby and we're all getting in this car and we're in Scottsdale. We go to this country bar. It's a big bar. And it's like that scene from Goodfellas. You kind of like go in the back and you walk through. And I'm like, what is going on? And Ted knows everybody. It's like, high fiving like some of the guys, like the bus boys. And we go into this back area. I said, what is going on? He's like, oh, I own this bar, Dirk's Bentley, country bar. It was a huge country bar. I said, what are you talking about? Like, so can you kind of unleash your secret identity here as a country music entrepreneur, and how and why, and just your coolness factor is going to skyrocket?
I don't remember getting the invite to that that bar.
Oh gosh. I told you I liked entrepreneurs, and I like all kinds of entrepreneurs. I happen to be a country music guy. And some guys came to me that were young guys with 20s in Chicago, and they were getting involved in the country music space, and they were opening a bar in Scottsdale, in Old Scottsdale, which is a great area if you haven't been to. And they had Dirk Bentley, who was a country music star, as the guy that they were going to give a royalty to, and they needed to raise money. I mean, guys come to me generally either for advice or to raise money,
Or both, yeah.
or both. And in this case, it was both. And I helped him. I put some money up, and I helped him raise a bunch of money to basically build the bar in Scottsdale. And you want to talk about a business deal? So we raised about $8 million to build this bar, and it was a big bar. It was on the corner of 4th and Broadway in Nashville, which is the one we were doing. We had another one in Scottsdale, and so I helped him raise some money for both those bars. And all of a sudden, country music took off, and the guys were good operators and nice guys. And I was a passive investor. A lot of things I'm more active. This one I was completely passive, and it took off and it did well. And it's gone crazy. The bars, $25 million a year. Bars make about 50%. So, you make an investment, and, you're making $10-12 million a year on this stuff, and you get lucky. And that was a lucky one, but I love country music. I love to hang out. I love to party, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And I don't get a chance to do it very often, but it's a lot of fun.
One thing I've noticed about you, Ted, when we hang out, like you get energized, I think, by the energy of younger guys. You seem very young. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Like how you've maintained that over these decades?
Listen, you guys will do the same thing as you get older. I mean, it's a state of mind. It's where your head's at. I still see myself as a 40-year-old guy. That's the problem. Good and bad. I should be in my 60s. I should be doing different things than in my 40s, but I still see myself as in my 40s. And I'm lucky. I'm blessed with good energy. I'm blessed with a reasonable thought process, and I love it. And it's just it's what fuels me. And there's certain entrepreneurs tend to be fueled just a little differently, and that's kind of the way I am.
You have any advice or secrets? What drives that energy, or is it just kind of being around and building stuff?
I think it's about the people that you associate with. You always want to be around good people, and people that drive a feeling of positivity. I love business. I love entrepreneurship. I love to see people pivot. Your life, Ravin, you've done different things. Al's doing a lot of different things. I love to see that. And, I've had a lot of experience on what happens when things don't go as planned. So the part of the fun is negotiating that and dealing with things that don't go always the way you think, or trying to build on something good and make it better.
One thing that we've kind of maybe uniquely talked about on a startup sort of business political podcast are kids and parenting. And when my wife and I met you guys, Ted, we got a sense that your kids were really, really good. We heard everyone who met them was sort of giving these glowing reports, your sons and your daughter. And it was always like, how did you do it? One of the things that's resonated with a lot of our listeners is hearing successful guys talk about raising kids in the face of success and not having them effed up. So, what would you say?
Listen, I made it a point. I was lucky enough where I worked hard, and my wife at the time was really focused on the kids. She didn't work out of the house, so she was focused on the nurturing part of it. But I was very focused on making sure that the kids understood that life is about working hard and about appreciating what you have, and not giving kids too much. And we did not give our kids a lot. We made them earn and work for what they had. They didn't go without certain things that they needed, but they did not have excess. But also there was a work ethic. I think if kids work hard early, you're giving them the greatest gift, whether it's jobs, whatever kind of jobs, chores. Kids have to learn responsibility, because life is responsibility. I mean, we have responsibility. And the challenge very often is, if you're successful, you rob your kids of the responsibility because you give them everything because you want to do it. And sometimes the greatest gift is making the kids struggle a little bit to learn that they need to earn results, and they need to,
Well,
feel responsible.
Ted, I heard about these very luxurious vacations and trips that you guys used to take as kids. They seemed like they got the benefit of that luxury.
We went until they were about 12 years old. We went to the Wisconsin Dells. We went to a lot of places that we drove to. Once the kids turned about 12 or 13, I thought it was important for them to see the world. But for their first 10, 12, 14 years, we
Yeah.
didn't do
No,
extravagant trips.
no, I was joking. I heard there were these RVs or campers you would drive across the country,
Yeah, we did
and
we
and
did that for 4 years. We took RV camping trips where I took 4 kids and put them in a camper, and we drove across the country and lived in the camper. It was hard, but those were probably some of their most fun vacations looking back.
I remember we were together at Art Basel down here in Miami a few years ago, Ted, and we were having dinner, and you were kind of talking about another friend in common who was at that dinner, and you had coached his sons on baseball. And you were basically saying, and you just lit up and you love talking about this stuff. And you're like, look, I am a coach. Like, that is kind of my fundamental thing, whether it was, you know, baseball, whether it was basketball, whether it was just as a parent. Like, do you think that is one of your core competencies?
I think at the end of the day, you can't tell anybody this, but I would have been happy to be a high school, basketball coach, and lived a happy life. I coached all my kids playing when they grew up, the boys. I didn't get a chance to do that with my daughter, and I regret it. But I coached all my boys baseball and basketball. And I knew every kid in the neighborhood. I knew every kid in the district. I knew every kid in the high school area, because I ended up coaching all of them. And it's like anything. It's like managing people. You learn a lot about how to motivate people, because some kids are more talented than others. Some kids have a longer attention span than others. Some kids care. Some parents care more than others. And there's a lot of dynamics, both, psychology, motivational, management, that you learn by coaching. And I had a ton of fun doing it. And I think that contributed to some of, the success of Monroe, because today I'm still coaching. I'm just coaching 350 people do their jobs.
so I guess on Monroe today, as you said, you've sold the company. Are you still as motivated to continue to grow? And what's your strategy if you look forward 10, 15 years?
So I brought an investor on. I still have 25% of the business, so I'm still very financially motivated. But again, I mean, the motivation for me has never been about money. I told Ravin this years ago that, my issue is I see a field and I see grass. I want to mow the grass, and I want to mow as much grass as I possibly can when I see an open field. And it's the same thing today. Monroe's grown to about 25 billion in assets. I think we can get to 50. I think there's an opportunity in Europe to build a franchise for Monroe. Our new owners want us to do that. So, the question for me is it's a delicate balance between, how much grass I mow and how much grass I let everyone else mow. And at this point, what I'm focused on is more about transitioning leadership and mentoring leadership, because to get to 50 billion, it's not going to be because of Ted. Ted got us to 25 billion. It's going to be everybody else.
I'm going to marry a couple points that you just said. One is, this is a guy who looks at the world and sees a bunch of lawns and he wants to mow the grass. Okay, that's one part of his personality. And you've heard a little bit about that with this country bar. The other thing is we're talking about private credit. So what does that mean? It means that Monroe puts out $150 million checks to all these businesses. The businesses usually pay the money back, but sometimes businesses don't. And in that case, Monroe basically gets the business. Well, I remember hearing this story from Ted once where he said, yeah, we had this loan and it went south and we got all this land back. Next thing you know, this guy is building this unbelievable condo project here in Miami. It's like, it's truly just amazing. So Ted, give us a little story on what happened there.
Listen, it's making lemonade out of lemons. And, we've all had to do that. We had a loan that we made to a big developer in New York, about 16 properties. And we made the loan. It was a good loan. We thought we had collateral. The problem is that COVID hit, and they had hotels, they had apartment buildings, they had all kinds of difficulties, and they ran into problems, and they didn't pay us, and they wouldn't pay us. And we tried to work it out. We tried all different types of things, and they couldn't pay us. So we ended up with a foreclosure on 16 different properties. We had houses in the Hamptons. We had townhouses in the Upper East Side, the Upper West Side. And we ended up with a piece of property, a piece of land in South Beach that we had no idea what it was. And I was getting calls from brokers because I was a CEO of the company, and brokers were asking me if we'd sell them the land. So I told our guys to go figure out what this is. So we went down to South Beach and we hired an architect. And the architect told us that we were sitting on an oil well, basically, on South Beach. And I told him, I don't understand. He says, Ted, you don't understand this. You can build condos and you can build a hotel on South Beach right next to the Setai, which is on 20th and Collins. So we went out and we interviewed a bunch of developers. We ended up hiring a developer named Steve Witkoff, who is now trying to solve all the world's problems with President Trump. And we got through zoning, and we got through design review, and we built the best project that was possible to build in South Beach, Miami. And we brought in an architect named Robert M. Stern. We built the highest end project that was possible, and we got lucky. The timing was good right after COVID, and we sold the project out at 2.5 times what we thought would be the per square foot sales price. And we have an Amman.
North of $5K a foot, right?
Yeah, north of $5,000 a foot. We have an auberge hotel. We have 17 floors of, beautiful, beautiful condos. We've sold the condos to leaders of world leaders around the world, high-end corporate guys, a lot of guys from Chicago. And it's,
I got the brochure and I got an email from Ted saying, hey, we'll give you the friends and family discount. And I'm like, well, the friends and family discount still seems really expensive. He's like, yeah, but hey.
It comes with a loan. Yeah, a Monroe loan that will help you fund it.
Yeah, it's we've been lucky. We got a lot of appreciation. So the project turned out really, really well. So we got lucky. That was a problem deal that we could have gone a lot of different ways on and ran away from, but we turned into it and, tried to figure out a way to solve an issue.
You talked about seeing around corners, having your background historically. So now where we sit today, you obviously are in a great position. Monroe's in a great position, but we have had some hiccups in private credit. Jamie Dimon, I think, called it the cockroaches hidden in private credit. What do you see around the corners today? What worries you? What should we be thinking about?
I think there's a few things. Number one is that a lot of money is coming to the space. And, whenever a lot of money comes into a space, it gets competitive. And what happens is you've got a lot of money looking for a home. And in credit, those tend to be called credit cycles. And there's risk that because of all the capital that's come into the space, some of the managers can put that capital to work quickly and not as thoughtfully as they would, perhaps, when there was less capital available. So the one issue is capital. Number two is there's a tremendous amount of fee compression happening in the industry, where investors, because of the capital, are demanding managers work for less money and less money and less money, and that's going to create some challenges for managers to do things that are perhaps unnatural for them. The third thing that I'm concerned about is there's a lot of talk right now in Washington about opening up alternative assets to 401k plans and retirement plans. Historically, institutional investors have been the ones that have driven most of the investment. When you open up alternative assets to 401k plans and individuals who are unsophisticated, what's going to happen is that money's going to rush in, more money's going to rush into private credit and to private equity and into real estate, and it's going to drive pricing up. It's going to drive structure down, and invariably it's going to cause losses. And without oversight, without a proper oversight, we're going to see large potential risk, I think, to high net worth retail investors that don't understand that private assets, alternative assets, are illiquid.
A lot of people complain about this country so much today. Maybe it's the polarization, maybe it's just the media. You have, beyond building an unbelievable firm, you have financed the growth of so much of America. When you talk about lower mid market, right? So many entrepreneurs that have created so many thousands of jobs. What do you say to the people who are really down on America for whatever reason it is? I don't care where you are on the political spectrum. What do you think? Is American exceptionalism real?
Listen, America, there's no place like the US. I've been in just about every, major business jurisdiction, Middle East, Asia, Europe. There's no place like the US from a um, work ethic, from an intellectual capital, from an entrepreneurial standpoint. You can bitch about it, we can complain, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that, but at the end of the day, if you're smart, if you have a business, you can raise capital here in the US and you can execute. And it's for that reason that investors all over the world want to invest with us. In the last 30 days, I've been in Seoul, um, Tokyo, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Kuwait, Doha, and investors want to invest here. So I'm hugely bullish on the U.S. and on the U.S.'s future. We've got some challenges to solve internally, and on the outside looking in, when you watch the news, BBC and CNN, and what non-U.S. investors tend to see, it doesn't look so good, because they tend to sensationalize and focus on the bad things. But it's still the best overall market and the safest market and most liquid market. That's what we have to remember, though. We have to preserve that.
Europe is interesting because I think if you look at kind of like the share of GDP in the world for the U.S. versus Europe, I think the U.S. has maintained its share of GDP over the last really 30, 40, 50 years. Something just under 30% maybe of global GDP. In Europe has decreased by 50%. And so it's always interesting to me that I think the Europeans do have this colored view of America, but as their own economies have been slower and they have massive issues with immigration that they're dealing with and their own problems internally. What excites you about investing in Europe?
I am, I'm very cautious about Europe, Al. I agree with you on that. I've got a business partner that wants to diversify, and build a business in Europe. I've been very, very cautious about, how we do it because as you said, I'm not a huge fan right now of UK, Germany and France, which are the 3 biggest engines in Europe. None of them are hitting on all cylinders right now. You have high employment, low consumer confidence, low business confidence, higher taxes, a lot of outbound manufacturing happening. So I'm concerned about it in general.
Yeah, I mean, and the numbers have been crazy. I think if you look at just innovation broadly in Europe, there's something, I think like 10 companies with market caps that are startup-y oriented companies that have started in the last 20 years with market caps north of 10 billion. And then the US, it's hundreds.
Yeah.
It's just a multiple. And I think that's the power of the system is that it drives the innovation.
It's an issue. I mean, right now, the current administration in France, for example, they tried to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. The country went on strike. The country was closed. They had to go back to 62 because, and they have a 37-hour work week. If you try to raise the work week hourly, the country strikes. So it's just a different philosophy on business.
But when you see a Mondami, and to your point earlier about is he a canary in the coal mine in terms of what's happening in the big blue cities that we all love in this country? I mean, I don't know. This is where I just feel like is being a pure centrist the right opinion right now if all of us feel like this is an existential risk? Or do you feel like that this is just kind of a blip and things swing back and forth?
I think it's too early to tell. That's a good question. I think it's too early to tell. I think there's this, everything moves. We got Obama because of, Bush. We got Trump because of Obama. So everything kind of moves around. And I think Mandami, can thank Trump very much for, his election because, blue cities were polarized, I think, by some of the policies. And in time, everything kind of moves back and forth in a pendulum. I'm hopeful that, New Yorkers will figure out that their fate isn't going to be any better. I mean, look at Chicago with Brandon Johnson, if for the best example of those socialist policies.
My last question is we talked to Congressman Crenshaw last week, and I said, you know, I want to thank you for your service because so many of my friends who could conceivably run for office don't want to do it because they say, oh man, no, I'm not going to ruin my life. And he said, tell those people it is not that bad and we need a lot of good people. And therefore, I feel like with everything that we've heard today, if JB Pritzker were not to run and we think about a Governor Koenig or, Senator Koenig, why not? Why not draft Ted Koenig?
I don't think so. I got enough to do. My,
Not the answer we wanted, Ted. That's fun. We need more. We need more.
I've got plenty to do. I'm mentoring people. I want to see. I'm trying to teach. Or at this point, I want to teach, and I want to see people achieve some of the success I've achieved.
When I left GMM and I was debating, do I want to buy a business quickly? Ted was the guy like, bring me the deal. I want to do it. Like I want to back, like successful entrepreneurs. And I thought, my God, this guy has this magnetism where it makes you as an operator want to go find a deal because you see what they're doing. So I thank you for that.
So Ted, thank you for spending time on New Year's Eve here with us. Hopefully you have some fun plans, and it's been a ton of fun digging in and getting to learn a bit more about your story.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Listen, I love you two guys. At the end of the day, if I look back at myself, what I was thinking about, you two are way more sophisticated and have way more going for you than I had when I was, starting out and, in my life. But anything I can do to help, I see you guys as our next, as the future leaders. So, keep it going, keep doing what you're doing.
All
Awesome.
right. Thank you, Ted Koenig, for all the wisdom. And I'm sure we are going to be seeing you guys in person down here in the warm weather pretty soon.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye,
Ted.
guys.
All right, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.